A school bus carrying 14 black children, their teacher, and a driver vanished 10 years ago during a routine field trip. The school denied the trip ever happened. The case was closed as a runaway. But this morning, that same bus was pulled from a Louisiana swamp, half submerged, windows cracked, and something still pressed to the glass. A small handprint. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It means everything to know we're telling these stories together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. Denise Warren stood at the edge of Bayou Chain, her shoes sinking slowly into the wet earth, eyes locked on the rusted yellow roof, just barely visible through the swamp reeds. The sun was rising behind her, casting a pale orange glow over the water, but she didn't feel the warmth. All she felt was the weight in her chest. After 10 long years, she was staring at the one thing they all said didn't exist. Bus number 72. The bus that took her daughter and never came back. In 2014, Denise had sent Jada off to school like any other Friday. She tied her daughter's braids, packed her favorite fruit snacks, and kissed her forehead as the morning bus pulled up. Jada had begged to bring her dinosaur keychain that day, said it was for good luck. "We're going to Lakeview, Mama," she had grinned. Ms. Daniels said it's like a museum for heroes. That was the last time Denise saw her daughter. There were 14 children on that field trip, all between 10 and 12 years old. All black. Ms. Bernice Daniels, the kids' favorite teacher, had organized the trip to Lakeview Cultural Center. It was supposed to be educational, safe, something the school had done for years. The children even made posters and thank you cards in class the week before. But none of them ever came home. When the bus didn't return that evening, most parents assumed there'd been a delay. Maybe traffic, maybe a flat tire. But by sunset, Denise was pacing her front porch. By midnight, she was outside the school with 12 other frantic parents trying to get answers. No one from the school responded. No one from the district. No one answered their phones. At 1:30 in the morning, Officer Maurice Pickens arrived. He was the only one. He scribbled a few notes, yawned in their faces, and offered one theory. These kids probably ran off somewhere. Happens more than you think. Denise had to be held back by two mothers when she lunged toward him. Jada wasn't a runaway. None of them were. They were just kids on a school trip. No Amber Alert was issued. No search teams were dispatched. The local news ran a 3-minute segment and moved on. When the parents demanded answers from Principal Charlene Moss, she said the trip was never approved. She claimed the children never left campus. She said Ms. Daniels acted on her own and must have taken the bus without permission. But Denise knew that wasn't true. She had proof. Ms. Daniels had sent a group photo at 10:12 a.m. that morning. It showed her and the children smiling on the bus, holding up little signs that read Lakeview or bust. The photo had a geotag, 9 miles southeast of the school. But after the kids disappeared, that photo vanished from every parent's phone, deleted remotely. Denise only had a printed copy because she'd saved it before her battery died. For the next decade, Denise became what people whispered about. The woman who couldn't let go. The mother who still set a place at the table for a child who wasn't coming home. She collected every article, every flyer, every piece of gossip. She filed lawsuits, attended every school board meeting. She slept with a notebook on her nightstand, writing down every dream in case it meant something. Jada's room stayed exactly as it was. Bed made, shoes lined up, posters still on the wall. She wasn't the only one who refused to forget. Simone Bellamy, a young journalist fresh out of college in 2014, had covered the story. She pushed too hard, asking why there was no field trip log, why the school cameras were mysteriously offline that morning, why Officer Pickens didn't follow protocol. She was fired for bias. She'd spent the last 10 years running a blog dedicated to missing black children. Most of the time, no one listened. Then, yesterday morning, Simone received an anonymous message. No words, just a GPS coordinate and a photo. It showed the outline of a school bus, barely visible under swamp water and vines. She immediately called Denise. Denise drove straight there before the police could interfere. And now here she was, standing in front of bus number 72. Search crews were arriving behind her, slowly gathering equipment. The trapper who sent the photo had vanished without a trace. No name, no follow-up, just a message. But it was enough. They winched the bus from the muck. The cables groaned. Frogs scattered. The water churned black as the frame rose, algae peeling off the windows like skin. The door hung crooked, rusted shut. It took a crowbar to pry it open. No bodies, no bones, just a shell of a bus lost in time. But inside, there were signs of life once lived and taken. A child's handprint was still pressed against the rear window. Small, delicate, preserved by silt and silence. Someone had reached out. On the steering wheel was Ms. Daniels' red lanyard, tied tight in a knot. Her school ID was still clipped to it, cracked but legible. Behind the driver's seat, searchers found a plastic Ziploc bag taped to the frame. Inside were several children's drawings, faded, wrinkled but intact. Denise sat on the grass, legs folded beneath her, as she pulled out each drawing. One showed a circle of trees and a building labeled New Place. Another showed a winding road with a sign marked "No Trespassing." The last one was a map, crude, drawn in bright orange crayon, showing the outline of the swamp. At the bottom, in a shaky child's handwriting, were the words, "Our real trip." Denise clutched the paper to her chest. She couldn't cry. Not yet. Her eyes were locked on that phrase. Not Lakeview. Not the museum. Our real trip. Someone had rerouted that bus. And someone had covered it up. Detective Lance Morrow hadn't planned to get involved. When the call came about the bus in the swamp, he thought it was another abandoned vehicle case. Maybe stolen years ago, finally resurfacing. But the moment he saw the news clip, the old photo of the kids lined up in matching polos, smiling in front of a bus with Lakeview or bus scribbled on poster board, he stopped mid-chew and dropped his fork. This wasn't just a cold case. It was a wound the town never let scab over. The department had buried it, poorly. When Morrow asked for the case file, the clerk brought him a manila folder that was nearly empty. No incident reports. No photos. No evidence logs. Just a single sheet of paper marked closed. Runaway youth, field trip unconfirmed. It had been signed by Officer Maurice Pickens, who'd retired 5 years earlier. Morrow knew Maurice. Old school. Dismissive. Especially if the victims were black. He once said missing kids usually come crawling back when they run out of snacks. Morrow checked the timestamp on the report, filed the same night the kids were reported missing. Less than 6 hours after the last parent saw them board the bus. No search. No interviews. No urgency. He dug deeper. The school's field trip calendar from 2014 had been wiped. Completely blank for the week in question. He called the district office and was told those files had been lost in a server migration. The transportation records? Also missing. Archived bus maintenance logs were intact for every vehicle except bus number 72. But there was one thing they missed. A paper backup, buried in a forgotten cabinet labeled "Print Only." It held a printed copy of the original trip request submitted by Ms. Bernice Daniels. Signed, dated, and approved by none other than Principal Charlene Moss. He drove straight to the district office to speak with her. Charlene was now the superintendent of student affairs. She greeted him in a sleek office with a glass wall and an untouched Keurig machine. "Detective Morrow," she said, cool and composed. "What brings you by?" "I'm reopening the case from 2014, he said. "The Booker T. field trip. Bus number 72. Her smile thinned. "That case was closed. Tragic, yes, but also unresolved. And not criminal." Morrow placed the printed form on her desk. "You signed this." She glanced at it. "Forgery. That's not my signature. It's identical to the one on your staff contract." Charlene didn't blink. "We've been through this before." Ms. Daniels acted outside protocol. She didn't log the trip properly. There was no formal destination. She took children off campus without clearance. "But you didn't fire her." "I couldn't. She vanished." "You didn't issue a missing persons report for her either." She leaned back. There was no point in wasting resources on an adult who may have fled prosecution. She broke rules. She was taking children to a museum. Charlene's voice dropped an octave. She was taking children to private land. Land that wasn't zoned for educational use. Land that was under development. Morrow's eyes narrowed. And who owned that land? Charlene stood. I think we're done here. That night, Morrow sat in his car with a cheap gas station sandwich, staring at the bus photos again. The child's handprint, the red lanyard, the drawings. Something about them gnawed at him. He pulled up a digital map and overlaid the drawing with local landmarks. One trail aligned perfectly with a real swamp road, closed for years due to flooding. But the hand-drawn map showed an X near a spot labeled Crossroads. It wasn't a part of any public route. Then his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. A single text appeared. She knew. Asked the church. Attached was a grainy scan of a letter. It was addressed to the school board. Signed by Ms. Daniels. In the letter, she wrote, I'm concerned about the rerouting of our field trip. This is not educational. It is being arranged by outside parties for reasons not made clear to me. I'm not comfortable taking my students there. I am requesting an alternate destination. The letter had never been filed. The next morning, Morrow visited Denise Warren. She welcomed him into her small living room, lined with candlelit photos of the missing children. On her wall was a massive corkboard covered in strings, pins, and clipped articles. It was more organized than the police archive. I need to see what you've kept, he said. She nodded and pulled out a box from beneath Jada's untouched bed. Inside were journals, news clippings, drawings, copies of texts from parents, and a flash drive labeled Simone. He plugged it into his laptop. The first file was a video clip. In it, a younger Simone Bellamy stood in front of Booker T. Elementary. No one will tell us where these children went, she said. No one will explain why the trip that everyone saw happen is being erased from record. But we are not going to stop asking. Denise tapped the screen. She came by once a month for the first 3 years. Then something scared her. She stopped answering my calls. Morrow stared at the map pinned above the screen. The swamp, the church, the school. Everything was connected by lines. And right in the center, pinned in red, was a small paper with 4 words written in capital letters. Franklin Community Church. Why this place? Morrow asked. Denise stared at the photo of Jada on her dresser. Because the day before the trip, Ms. Daniels told me she was nervous. Said someone from the church had insisted they take the kids to a special site instead of the museum. She said she didn't want to cause trouble. Morrow stood slowly. His voice was quiet. Then maybe it's time I pay them a visit. Franklin Community Church looked like the kind of place you'd forget. White painted brick, now faded to gray, sagging window frames, a cracked sign out front that once read faith, family, fellowship. It sat on a rural stretch of road just beyond the edge of town, where trees grew too close and silence felt manufactured. Detective Lance Morrow pulled his car into the gravel lot, dust kicking up behind him, and parked beside a rusting metal fence where 2 bicycles were still locked in place, weathered, untouched. One still had streamers on the handlebars. Inside, the pews were empty. The scent of mildew hung in the air, mixed with old wood and long-faded perfume. At the altar stood Pastor Elijah Franklin, tall, soft-spoken, and dressed in a dark suit that looked too expensive for the church he preached in. He turned as Morrow entered, his eyes calm but distant, like a man who'd been preparing for this moment. You're not here for the sermon, he said. No, Morrow replied. I'm here about the field trip. The pastor tilted his head. It's been 10 years. I know, Morrow said, but now we have the bus. Pastor Franklin didn't flinch. I saw it on the news. A tragedy. Those children deserved justice a long time ago. You helped organize the original trip, Morrow said. You coordinated with the school. You even donated funds for transportation. I've helped with many things, the pastor replied. We were deeply involved with the school. We believed in giving those children opportunity. Did you reroute the trip? The pastor's expression hardened, just slightly. I suggested an alternative location, one I was told was being considered for educational development. Nature-based learning. A partnership I believed. Who told you that? He looked down at his Bible. A man named Victor Braxter. He worked for Conway and Braxter Development. Said they were acquiring land near the swamp. Said if the kids visited, it would help justify the zoning change. Morrow's stomach turned. You knew it wasn't a museum. I was assured it was safe. 14 children, 1 teacher, and a bus driver disappeared. And you never told police about this rerouting? The pastor hesitated. I was told it wasn't my place, that it had all been handled. Morrow stepped closer. Handle how? I received a call 2 days after the trip, Pastor Franklin said quietly, from a number I didn't recognize. A man said they were never meant to go that far. He told me to forget it, to stop asking questions, that if I valued my congregation, I'd move on. Morrow pulled out his notebook. Did you? I did, the pastor whispered. I prayed. I buried myself in sermons. But I never forgot. Morrow turned to leave, then paused. Did you ever visit the land they were taken to? Yes, the pastor said. Once. Before it was fenced off. What did you see? The pastor's voice dropped to a whisper. A clearing, a portable building, and tire tracks that led toward the swamp. Later that night, Morrow returned to the station, replaying the conversation over and over. Conway and Braxter had gone bankrupt 8 years ago, right after the swamp development project mysteriously collapsed. He searched through archived zoning records and found something strange, an application dated a week after the field trip, requesting a permit to build a private camp facility. The landowner listed was Franklin Community Church, but the permit was denied. The reason? Environmental risk due to high water table and unauthorized clearing activity reported by local hunters. It wasn't long after that the land was declared off-limits. Trees grew back. The swamp reclaimed its secrets. Morrow reached out to Simone Bellamy next. She picked up on the first ring. I was wondering when you'd call, she said. I need to see everything you still have on the case. They met at a quiet diner outside town. Simone slid a hard drive across the table and leaned in. They tried to bury everything, she said, but some files always slipped through. On the drive were dozens of documents, land permits, donor lists, emails between Pastor Franklin and Victor Braxter, and one chilling recording. It was a voicemail Ms. Daniels had left for a friend the night before the trip. Her voice was tight, almost whispered. Charlene changed the location again. Says the kids need to see new opportunities. But the address isn't even on a map. I looked it up. It's swamp. There's nothing there. I don't feel right about this. I'm going to take pictures, just in case. Morrow clenched his fists. The next day, Denise Warren received a brown padded envelope on her porch. No return address. Inside was a tiny, spiral notebook, water-stained, the pages curled. It was Jada's. Most of the pages were doodles. Dinosaurs. Stars. Trees. But near the back, in shaky pencil strokes, was a short sentence. Ms. Daniels said, "Don't tell anyone." She said people would get hurt. Then, at the very bottom, a child drawing of a red building with a cross on top. Denise's fingers trembled. She turned to the last page. There, written in a circle, over and over, were 5 haunting words. She told us to wait. The national news had picked it up by now. Satellite vans parked near the swamp. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Talk show hosts debated whether the bus was a symbol of neglect or something darker. But to Denise Warren, none of that mattered. Her daughter was still gone. And every camera felt like a vulture circling a body that hadn't even been found. Simone Bellamy, now with her job reinstated and a platform 10 times bigger, stood at the center of it all. She looked older than 10 years ago, sharper, maybe harder, but her eyes still carried the same fire. She didn't wait for anyone to give her permission this time. She aired the voicemail from Ms. Daniels on her live stream. She uploaded the field trip request forms. She published the letter to the school board, the chalk drawing, and the final line from Jada's notebook. And in under 12 hours, her inbox was flooded. Among the thousands of messages, one stood out. It was from a private account. No name, no avatar, just a message that read, "I saw where they took them. I ain't talking unless I'm safe." Simone showed the message to Detective Morrow the next morning. He tracked the IP address to a trailer on the edge of Eastwood Parish. A swamp trapper named Kenny Riles lived there, 29 years old, mostly off-grid, known for selling frogs and gator tails at the weekend market. He had no criminal record, but a reputation for keeping to himself. Morrow found Kenny sitting on his porch with a rifle across his lap, hands twitching with every sound. The moment he saw the badge, he stood, eyes darting toward the woods behind him. "I don't want no trouble," he said. I'm not here to make any, Morrow replied. You sent the photo, didn't you? Kenny didn't answer. You were in the swamp 10 years ago. Kenny lowered his voice. I saw something. I didn't mean to, but I did. He invited Morrow in. The trailer was cluttered but clean, filled with taxidermied animals and jars of swamp water labeled by date. In a shoebox beneath his bed, he kept a stack of photographs, most taken from a distance, grainy and hard to make out. He handed one to Morrow. It showed the edge of a clearing near the swamp, back in 2014. A rusted truck, a large white tent, a group of men in construction vests unloading boxes. They weren't building nothing, Kenny said. They were dumping. What kind of dumping? Barrels, bags, stuff they didn't want seen. I figured it was illegal trash, so I followed from a distance. He paused, voice trembling, and then I saw the bus. It had been backed halfway into the water, nose pointed toward the trees. No lights, no movement. Kenny said he saw a woman, black, curly hair tied back, wearing a red lanyard, arguing with one of the men. She looked scared, kept pointing to the kids. You saw the children? Just a few. Through the windows. They were sitting quiet. One of them was crying. Did you hear what they said? No, but I heard the man yell something like, you should have kept your mouth shut. Then I heard a bang, and she was gone. Morrow stared at him. Gone. I don't know if she ran or if they dragged her out, but she disappeared. Next thing I saw, the men pushed the bus further into the swamp. You didn't report it? Kenny's jaw tightened. Who'd listen? Black kid's missing. White man with no address claims he saw it. They'd arrest me before asking questions. So I shut up. Morrow glanced around the trailer. Why come forward now? Kenny hesitated. Because the water dropped. Because people started talking again. And because I think someone's watching me. Who? I don't know. Truck been parked up the road every night this week. Same one I saw back in 2014. Morrow promised protection. Kenny didn't look convinced. That night, Morrow got a call from dispatch. Kenny's trailer had gone up in flames. Total loss. No body found. The fire department blamed faulty wiring. But Morrow knew better. Back at the evidence unit, technicians were still combing through the recovered bus. They drained every pocket, scraped every panel, pulled the seats out one by one. In the floor beneath the driver's seat, they found teeth. Small, deciduous, children's teeth. 4 of them. DNA testing began immediately. Within days, 3 were matched to the warrant case. 3 missing children confirmed dead. 3 families devastated all over again. Behind the driver's seat, stuffed deep into the fabric lining, they found something else. A journal. Ms. Daniels' handwriting was unmistakable. The first few pages detailed class assignments, student notes, plans for the Lakeview trip. But halfway through, her tone shifted. The entries became erratic, fragmented, as though she were writing in fear. They changed the destination again. I told Charlene I wouldn't take them unless I got a clear answer. She said, it's all been approved. But she wouldn't look me in the eye. I've packed extra water and flashlights. Just in case. There's a man waiting near the church road. Said he'd lead us in. I don't like him. If anything happens, someone needs to look in the clearing. Near the old cross. I can't protect them all, but I'll try. The final page was torn clean down the middle. Simone stayed with Denise the night the DNA results came in. They sat in silence for hours. No TV, no phones, just Denise clutching Jada's dinosaur keychain and staring into the dark. Do you think she's gone? Simone finally asked. Denise didn't answer at first. Then she whispered no, and she meant it. There had been no body, no bone, no definite proof. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the years of anger and grief, was a small, defiant ember that still refused to burn out. Later that week, a new tip arrived. This time, it wasn't anonymous. A former construction worker had come forward. He claimed to have helped clear a site in the swamp back in 2014. So they were told to level an area for a temporary youth facility and remove all identifying markers. No permit, no blueprints. The crew worked 2 nights, then were paid in cash and told never to return. He drew a map from memory. It led to a patch of dense woods just past the bayou. A place overgrown now, reclaimed by nature. But if the foundation was still there, if anything had survived beneath the roots and vines and mud, Morrow knew they had to dig. Because someone had made sure those children were never found. And someone else had just pointed the way. The woods were silent except for the low hum of insects and the occasional squelch of boots in wet soil. Detective Lance Morrow stood beside a team of forensic specialists, eyes locked on a half-sunken patch of ground that looked, to the untrained eye, like any other stretch of Louisiana bayou. But this was the place. The coordinates matched the map drawn by the former construction worker. It was barely 2 miles from where bus number 72 had been found, deep enough in the brush that even satellite maps had blurred the terrain. They cleared the surface slowly, shovels, hands, water pumps. Beneath the moss and roots, they uncovered the first hard line, a poured concrete slab, long and rectangular, maybe 15 feet wide. No writing, no cross, no door, just a seam in the center where 2 slabs met, sealed with rusted bolts. The forensics team brought in ground-penetrating radar. Beneath the slab was a hollow chamber. It took hours to crack it open. Inside was darkness and the smell of rot sealed in time. Flashlights illuminated metal walls and a dirt floor. The space was no more than a storage container, converted, hidden, and buried. But it wasn't empty. They found 14 pairs of identical shoes, lined up in 2 neat rows along the left wall. Some had name tags still taped inside. On the opposite wall were crumpled foil snack wrappers, a broken flashlight, and torn scraps of spiral notebook paper too damaged to read. In the far corner, on what looked like a mattress made of bundled towels, lay a doll. Its hair was matted, its arm twisted. Denise Warren would later identify it as Jadis. And on a metal wall above the doll's resting place, someone had written in white chalk. She told us to be brave. Silence fell over the clearing. Simone Bellamy arrived 30 minutes later. She had driven from her studio without speaking, without broadcasting, without posting. For once, she didn't want anyone else's voice over this. She stood in the doorway of the chamber, hands over her mouth, eyes shining. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no signs of escape, just the echo of children who had been told to wait, and did. The state sent down a full investigation team, but Denise already knew what would happen. A statement would be made. An apology would be issued. A task force would be formed. No one would be arrested. She'd seen it before. She'd lived it for 10 years. So she focused on what mattered. Names. She sat down with Simone and Morrow and wrote every child's name in a notebook, adding details for each: birthdays, favorite colors, quirks. She added Ms. Daniels and the bus driver, Clay Hopkins. Then she passed it to Simone and said, "Say them all. Say them every time you talk. Don't let them be forgotten in headlines." Simone nodded. "I will." That night, while reviewing footage from the crime scene, one of the techs noticed something odd about the chalk writing. The final period at the end of the sentence wasn't just a dot. It was a dent. A small circular depression in the wall. He tapped it with his flashlight. Hollow. The team removed the panel. Behind it was a small cavity lined with cloth. Inside, they found a clear plastic bag sealed with tape. In it, a set of keys, a gold cross necklace, and a folded piece of paper. It was the missing final page from Ms. Daniels' journal. It read, "They're taking us. The kids are scared, but I told them we'd be okay. I don't believe it anymore. I hear trucks. I hear men. They're not coming to help. If anyone finds this, tell my son I didn't run. I stayed. I tried." Simone cried when she read it aloud. Morrow took the page into evidence himself. The next morning, a manila envelope arrived at Simone's station. No postage. No fingerprints. Just a return address scrawled in red ink. Chambers Mill Storage Unit 12B. Morrow and Simone drove there together. The facility manager said the unit had been paid for in cash every year since 2014. No name. No ID. Inside was a single plastic crate. They opened it. Dozens of Polaroid photos spilled out, some water damage, some pristine. They showed the children. Smiling. Reading. Playing. In the woods. In the bus. In a hidden chamber. In one photo, Ms. Daniels knelt beside Jada, wrapping her in a blanket. They looked tired, but alive. And then there was one final photo. It showed the entire group, children, Ms. Daniels, and the bus driver, standing in front of a crooked wooden sign. The sign read, "Franklin Community, New Beginnings Youth Project." Simone's fingers trembled as she flipped the photo over. Someone had written in ballpoint pen, "Last day before they moved us." Below that, another line. They smiled for the picture, but they were watching us from the trees. Morrow scanned the trees in the background. Two men in high-visibility vests stood, just barely visible behind the group. One held a clipboard. The other wore dark sunglasses and a hat pulled low, but his face was clear enough. Morrow froze. It was Officer Maurice Pickens, smiling, watching the children. He had been there. He had always been there. Denise Warren stood outside Booker T. Elementary School, now shuttered and fenced off with rusted chain links. 10 years ago, it was filled with the echoes of children, laughter, footsteps, the low hum of Ms. Daniels' morning bell. Now, it was a monument to silence. Reporters crowded behind yellow tape. Parents who had once paced this very sidewalk with flyers now stood side by side in solemn stillness. And above it all, the news helicopters circled like vultures. State officials had no choice but to acknowledge the discovery. They held a press conference that afternoon, filled with polished regret and well-rehearsed remorse. The governor offered a heartfelt apology to the families affected by this tragedy. She spoke of systemic failure, of a full inquiry, of long overdue answers. But no one said the word Denise wanted to hear. Guilty. No arrests. No charges. No one even mentioned Maurice Pickens by name. The former officer was nowhere to be found. His last known address had been cleared out, his pension transferred to an offshore account 3 months earlier. Someone had tipped him off. Someone in the very system now pretending to care. Simone Bellamy refused to let it go. She took to the airwaves with the photo in her hand, the one from the crate. She circled Pickens' face, put it side by side with his department ID, and read his name aloud on national television. She posted the clip on every social platform with a caption that read, "He was there." It went viral within hours. Hashtags flooded the internet. Hashtag Justice for the 14. Hashtag Where Were the Taken. Hashtag Pickens Knew. A week later, another envelope arrived at Simone's station. No return address. Inside was a second photo. This one showed only Ms. Daniels. She was seated in a metal chair, her wrists bound in front of her, but her eyes clear, defiant. Behind her stood the same wooded backdrop. The date scribbled on the back read, June 4th, 2014, 3 days after the children had vanished. It was the last confirmed image of her alive. There was a note included, handwritten in a shaky scrawl. She tried to stop it. They told us she was helping them. They lied. Denise held the photo for a long time before speaking. She died trying to protect them, she said quietly. And they tried to make her disappear, too. But Ms. Daniels had never been forgotten. Her name had remained on Denise's wall all these years, next to Jada's and the others. She had never stopped believing the teacher was innocent. And now she had proof. Simone arranged a vigil in the same park where the parents had once gathered in 2014. Hundreds showed up. Some drove across state lines. They held candles, read the names, played voice recordings of the children, retrieved from old voicemails and classroom projects. And then Denise stepped up to the mic. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't bring notes. She just said, they thought we'd forget them. They thought if they buried the truth deep enough, we'd give up. But here we are, still standing, still fighting, and we won't stop. The crowd answered in quiet unity. Tears, applause, raised candles. Then Simone took the stage and did what the state refused to do. She read the names, slowly, clearly, one by one. Ariel James, Kyman E. Carter, Jada Warren, Terrell Smith, Nia Franklin, Zaire Owens, Malik Harris, Destiny Ford, Lamar Briscoe, Trinity Knox, Elijah Johnson, Monique Bell, Rashad Green, Zoe Carter, Ms. Bernice Daniels, Mr. Clay Hopkins. For each name, a bell rang. By the end, the sound echoed across the park like a heartbeat. The following week, Denise received an unexpected call. It was from an investigative journalist in Atlanta who had been researching land seizures involving Conway in Braxtor Development. He heard about Simone's story and wanted to share something. Back in 2013, the company had filed to rezone 5 separate swamp sites across the southern states. Each time, they requested educational exemptions, claiming the land would be used for outdoor classrooms and experimental youth outreach. In every case, the permits were withdrawn or denied. All but one, the Louisiana site, the site where bus number 72 was found. The journalist also found a list of subcontractors used by the company, one of which was run by a former sheriff's deputy from Eastwood Parish, the same parish where Maurice Pickens had served for 15 years before being quietly transferred to the town where Booker T. Elementary was located. It had been orchestrated. The land, the rerouting, the paperwork disappearing, the story about runaway kids, all of it. And now, even with all the evidence, the key players were gone. The company was dissolved. The money scattered. The faces and the photos vanished. But the voices remained. Simone compiled everything into a special report titled "The Names They Tried to Bury." She included all the photos, journal entries, voicemail transcripts, and a final chalk message from the bunker wall. The documentary aired on multiple platforms. It was raw, unscripted, and devastating. It ended with Jada's drawing, the one labeled "Our Real Trip," zoomed in slowly while her voice, recovered from a second-grade reading project, played in the background. "My name is Jada Warren. I like dinosaurs, peanut butter sandwiches, and my teacher, Ms. Daniels. When I grow up, I want to be someone who helps people remember." That night, Denise sat alone in Jada's room. She didn't cry. Instead, she took out her daughter's journal, turned to the last blank page, and began to write. She wrote about the morning of the field trip, about the fruit snacks, about the goodbye wave, about every sleepless night, every unanswered call, every time someone told her move on. She wrote the names of the other children, what their mothers had told her, the birthdays that never got celebrated, the shoes left untouched, the laughter that still echoed when no one else could hear it. And then she wrote one final line. "I remember you. I always will." 2 days later, another anonymous tip came in. It wasn't about the children. It was about a warehouse filled with sealed files, unmarked tapes, and a list of other schools. Simone read the message aloud, her voice tight with fear and fury. This wasn't the first time, and it would not be the last.